Hi there, everyone, and welcome to this week's installment of the Good News according to Job. We are now turning this week to Bildad, so we'll be taking a look at what he has to say in response to Job. Hopefully we can unpack that one a little bit more in a little bit more depth and just consider a couple more things of what he is saying. And I hope that it will be helpful as we go through it, that we get to really think about how they are saying it, what they're saying, how it interacts with one another. So especially with Bildad and what he says to Job and how that affects things. And I really hope that it's going to challenge us and encourage us and stir us and get us thinking and wrestling. So there's so much in Job. And even in the longer series, as we're doing the longer study, unfortunately, even in that, we can't get into all the details. But I really hope that this study will at least give us the opportunity to do it a little bit slower and think about things a little bit more clearer. And the reality is, as I've been doing the short study, I feel that I've got into the end of that now this week. But as I got to the end in this week's one, I feel like I want to go right back to the very beginning and just start from there again as well, because as you get to the end of it, you realize that there is so much more depth, so much more things that you can wrestle with and contemplate, and how it challenges us in who we are and what we think. And so I really hope that will start to take place, if it hasn't yet already, but that we really wrestle also with ourselves as we wrestle through Job, wrestle with what we have created as our understanding in one sense, or our thinking, and allow that to be reshaped by who God is and what His Word says, and not by what we think it should say and how we think God works and functions. And Job really does challenge that in us. He really challenges our theology, our thinking, our understanding. He challenges our own wisdom, or what we think is wisdom. He shows an array of depth and magnificence that so surpasses us. And so, as we begin this week, what I'd like to do is actually just read the section for us as we get started, and just familiarize ourselves with this passage in Job. So let's turn to Job 8, and I'll read. Then Bildad the Shuhite replied, "How long will you say such things? Your words are blasting wind. Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? When your children sinned against Him, He gave them over to the penalty of their sin. But if you will seek God earnestly and plead with the Almighty, if you are pure and upright, even now He will rouse Himself on your behalf and restore you to your prosperous state. Your beginnings will seem humble, so prosperous will your future be. Ask the former generation and find out what their ancestors learned. For we were born only yesterday and know nothing, and our days on earth are but a shadow. Will they not instruct you and tell you? Will they not bring forth words from their understanding? Can papyrus grow tall where there is no marsh? Can reeds thrive without water? While still growing and uncut, they wither more quickly than grass. Such is the destiny of all who forget God. So perishes the hope of the godless. That they trust in is fragile. What they rely on is a spider's web. They lean on the web, but it gives way. They cling to it, but it does not hold. They are like a well-watered plant in the sunshine, spreading its roots over the garden. It entwines its roots around a pile of rocks and looks for a place among the stones. But when it is torn from its spot, that place disowns it and says, "I never saw you." Surely its life withers away, and from the soil other plants grow. Surely God does not reject one who is blameless, or strengthen the hand of evildoers. He will yet fill your mouth with laughter and your lips with shouts of joy. Your enemies will be clothed in shame, and the tents of the wicked will be no more. And so this is Bildad's response to Job in Job 8. And really, to just begin and think about who Bildad is, he comes across as, some might call him the traditionalist of the group. He is the one that holds on to the traditions of the forefathers, of those before them, and he really weighs up the issue of justice. Or perhaps you could consider him as also the pictorial one, the one that paints a picture of these things, using tradition, using imagery to convey the truths that he believes to be significant and important to Job. The first thing that I want to mention again, just in light of Eliphaz, is that what Eliphaz shared with us previously was incredibly rich with truth. And I want to state that. And the same goes to some degree for Bildad here. There is rich truth in what he is sharing. But the question is it applicable to Job? Is what he says applicable to Job? And so as we read through this, as we think about it, as we contemplate it, ask yourself that question. Do you think that everything that Bildad is saying here is applicable? Because most of the time, there are things that he says that resonate with us, that seem right, that seem true. But we can't simply take it as a given that this is applicable. The first thing that we want to just notice is what he says in verse 3. He asks this question, and what Bildad does is he asks a lot of rhetorical questions in this section, but he also asks it in a way that's, we could almost say it's the what ifs. So up front, he starts with this, almost this first question really, that we don't see it in the English, but it is almost more so that he's asking, what if God perverts justice? So he's asking the question, well, what if God had to pervert justice? Would he? And our response is no, God doesn't pervert justice. And so we can see the rhetorical questions in the nature of how he's asked it. And he asks a bunch of these what if questions. The same words are used at the start of each of these sentences or these questions. So what if God perverts justice? He says, what if your children sinned against him? But, in verse 5, but if you, what if you will seek God earnestly? And there again in verse 6, if you are pure and upright. So there's this if, this kind of a question that hinges on each thing that Bildad says here. And so the first thing that he does ask is, he turns to God's justice. He says, what if God perverted justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? And so we have that first rhetorical question. The next one, when your children sinned against him, it's slightly more of a question. What if your children had sinned against him? He gave them over to the penalty of their sin. So he's perhaps not saying it as outright as it seems there. He's not saying that, he's not saying it clear cut that Job's children had sinned, but he is asking the question, what if they had sinned and God handed them over? What would you do then? And the next one he asks, but if you will seek God earnestly and plead with the Almighty, if you are pure and upright, even now he will rouse himself on your behalf and restore you to your prosperous state. Will he not do that? If you seek him, if you plead with him, if you truly and honestly turn to him. So you see the aspect of justice coming in here. It is, you get what you deserve, and the only way to change that is to turn to God, is what he is saying. This is his theology, and in one sense it seems correct. The only way for us to find salvation, to be comforted, to be sure of who God is to recognize and to come to him in repentance of our sinfulness. But is that true for Job? Have we not learned something else? So again, we need to pause and remember what God has told us about Job in the beginning. That Job is blameless, he is upright, he fears God, and he shuns evil. And we see how he has done that, especially with his children, how he had quickly run to perform a sacrifice, an offering to God, in case his children had sinned, and without even them knowing about it. And so he was so meticulous. So the question that we are left to ask is that then true? Is what Bildad says here true concerning his children, concerning justice? Is this an issue of justice, what is happening to Job? Is Job's suffering a result of God being just upon Job's life? And if we keep in mind what we are told about Job, we find that though what Bildad may seem to be saying is true, it is not applicable for Job. He is a unique circumstance in that regard, that he is blameless and upright, and that he fears God and he shuns evil. The next thing that I would just like to highlight for us is if we look just down at verse 8, it says, "Ask the former generation and find out what their ancestors learned." And then he carries on in verse 9 and 10, "For we were born only yesterday and know nothing, and our days on earth are but a shadow. Will they not instruct you and tell you? Will they not bring forth words from their understanding?" And so what Bildad is showing us here is he's saying, let's turn to the previous generation. Let's look at them. Let's look at our forefathers. Let's look at our ancestors. Let's look at what they have taught us, how they have instructed us. And so this is where that traditionalist, that kind of religious requirement, that religious understanding of things, religious understanding of justice, religious tone in what Bildad says comes through. He's saying, let's turn back to our fathers and observe from them. We young, we are but infants in light of them. His words are this: "For we were born only yesterday," he actually says, "and know nothing." He's saying we are only newborns. They have had experience, they know. So let's turn to them. Let's turn to them and their teaching, for they can show us the truth. They can show us how God works, how God's justice functions, how when we look at suffering, how over time we have learned that through what they have taught us and handed down to us, that if you are suffering because you have opposed God, you have done something that you shouldn't. And so this goes back to that tendency that we do have, that when we are afflicted, when we experience hardship, when we experience suffering, we want to have this for a moment maybe, but maybe it's for a longer period of time. But some of us go into this space where we ask the question, is this happening to me because I have done X, Y, and Z? So there is that tendency to ask that question. And what Bildad is doing is he's saying, let's look at our ancestors, let's look at our forefathers, or those that came before us that have taught us, because what they have taught us is that is how God's justice works. If I do something wrong, God will punish me. If I do something right, God will bless me or prosper me. And so that is the kind of understanding that Bildad brings to the table. This is what he is suggesting to Job. He is saying, Job, your suffering is a result of something that you have done wrong. And it sounds now much like what Eliphaz is saying, is that Job must have done something wrong to be afflicted in the way that he is afflicted by God. And so this is the two aspects of the introduction. There's this introduction that Bildad has of justice that he brings to Job, but not just justice on its own, not his own understanding of justice, but actually the traditional understanding that's been handed down, that if you want things to go well with you, you will turn and give glory to God. But if you want to experience suffering and hardship, then that will be found when you are sinning and rejecting God and not being willing to repent. And that is the wisdom that Bildad brings to the table, wisdom of what has been handed down from one generation to another generation. I wouldn't want to oversimplify it, but it's kind of, in one sense, what you learn as a child. You're in the kitchen, and your parents tell you, mind the stove, it's hot, it will burn you. And the simple little image that we are, or the simple little lesson that we are taught is sometimes hard learned when we don't believe what they are saying, and so we have to test it, and we get burnt. And so you are burnt because you disobeyed your parents. Or you don't get burnt because you listen to your parents. And so it seems almost like this kind of mentality. Our parents have taught us this. Let's apply it. So if your parents can teach you that if you touch the stove, you'll get burnt because it is hot, then the same applies in one sense to how Bildad is saying and teaching here. He's saying, Job, you have got burnt because you have touched something that is hot. So what is it that, why have you done that? Because you've disobeyed. You haven't listened. You haven't learned from what your parents have taught you, or you haven't observed what has been taught. Where is your understanding of who God is then? And then what Bildad goes on to do is he paints these three pictures in Job 11 through to 19. Job 8 verse 11 through to 19, and these three images are that of reeds, or a plant, or a marsh plant, this web, a spider's web, and then this plant that kind of creeps through the garden. But let's quickly look there. So he asks the first question. He says, can papyrus grow tall where there is no marsh? Can reeds thrive without water? While still growing and uncut, they wither more quickly than grass. And then he says this, which is quite interesting, in verse 13, which we need to highlight. He says, such is the destiny of all who forget God, so perishes the hope of the godless. So he says, where there is no water, there is no life. If a marsh plant is removed out of that ground, or there is no water, then how can it survive? That's why he asked the question in verse 11, can papyrus grow tall where there is no marsh, where there is no water, where there is no sustenance, where there is no fertile ground in which it can grow? And so he is saying here that such is the destiny of those who forget God. If you forget God, you are like a marsh plant growing in a place that isn't a marsh. You are trying to grow in an environment that is hostile. You are trying to live and survive in an environment where God is absent. And so what he is saying, to challenging Job with here, is he's painting this picture for Job, and he's saying, Job, just like this marsh plant, this papyrus, this reed, you are incapable of surviving without God. You will dry up, you will shrivel, and this will be your destiny. And so he could be suggesting something even further here, is that what Job is facing, or why he is suffering, is for this reason, that he's already growing in an environment where God is not present, or trying to grow in an environment where God is not present. He's saying that you are shriveling up, you are dying in what is happening in your life and all these things, because you are not rooted in God. So quite an outright rebuke that Bildad brings to Job in this image. The next image is one of a spider's web, and listen to these words, what he says here. What they trust in is fragile. What they rely on is a spider's web. They lean on the web, but it gives way. They cling to it, but it does not hold. And so this image that he paints here with the spider's web is he's saying, you're holding on to, so like a marsh plant growing in a ground that isn't marshy, it isn't wet, it isn't able to sustain its growth, you are actually holding on to things that are flimsy, that are going to break. It is not something that can carry your weight, can sustain you. So he drops the image of the plant, and then he shifts on to this new image, saying what he is anchoring himself onto is not strong. It's not something that is necessarily sustainable or that can keep him in position. And just like a spider's web can break at any moment, it's not reliable. So is whatever he is putting his trust in. And then he gives this final image, and he says this. He turns to the plant in this garden. He says they are like a well-watered plant. There's the image again of this watered plant. in the sunshine, spreading its shoots over the garden. It entwines its roots around a pile of rocks and looks for a place among the stones. But when it is torn from its spot, that place disowns it and says, I never saw you. Surely its life withers away, and from the soil other plants grow. So there's this a strange image again, where this plant is trying to take root. In one sense, the picture that's given here is amongst some rocks. And he says that when it gets pulled out, its place will not remember it anymore. And so there's again this image of where a plant is taking root or thing is being anchored. So these images of anchoring of what you are being rooted in. And so what he is suggesting here is perhaps that as Job is perhaps removed, the very thing that he is holding on to will not remember him anymore. And maybe the best way is to paint this and flesh this image out just a little bit to kind of grasp the imagery of it. But if you think of a plant that is growing in amongst rocks and not necessarily the soil that you would think on a patch of grass, but in amongst rocks, if you pull that out, what's left is often that rock formation. And so you wouldn't necessarily see that there was a plant there. And in that same sense, he is saying that whatever you are growing yourself into or spreading your roots into, if you're pulled out of that, that space, that place won't even remember you. And then he takes it one step further by saying, surely its life withers away, and from the soil other plants grow. The wording there is actually even a little bit more strong. Is essentially from your very rot, other plants will sprout and grow. From the very decay of who you were and who you are as a plant in this image, other things will sprout. So he is saying, from the remains, from what you leave behind, whatever you've held on to, it will forget you. But also from what you leave behind, other things will sprout out of that, and new life will come. But you will be forgotten. Your legacy, your things that you're holding on to will be forgotten. And so now we need to pause at this point at the end of these images and really ask the question, is this applicable to Job? Is this applicable to Job? Is Job holding on to something? And is he drying up and shriveling, for lack of a better way of putting it? Is what is happening to Job here an indication that he is not rooted in God, or is there something else that we are missing? I think the answer to that question is that this isn't applicable to Job. Job is rooted in God, and we pick that up especially in the first 2 chapters of Job, where he says, God has given and God has taken away, and blessed be the name, or praise, I will praise the name of the Lord. And then when he responds to his wife, he says, do we only receive good from God and not trouble or hardship? And so the question is, if that is true, is Job's roots not in God? And beyond that, we know that we have once again got to repeat it. But Job is blameless, he is upright, he fears God, and he shuns evil. That's his foundation. That's where his roots are lying, because that has been where he has been focused his life. That's why he is called blameless. But what Bildad is suggesting is that Job is perhaps holding on to something. His roots are established in something else, and when he is ripped out eventually, that he will wither and all things will forget him, and that other things will overgrow it. New things will come, and life carries on. But this isn't particularly true just for Job. It may be a true sentiment, or there may be truth in what Bildad is saying here, that if you aren't rooted in the right place, then there may be trouble and hardship in life. But for Job, we know that he is rooted in God. He is established in God. But what has happened to him is there is no reason or explanation for it. And Job is suffering simply because he is suffering. And as we look at this section and contemplate these images, we realize that they are not images that reflect truth concerning Job and his circumstance. That Job is rooted in God, and that what is happening to him is beyond explanation, at least from a human perspective. And that He is not, as he says, as Bildad says in verse 13, such is the destiny of all who forget God, so perish the hope of the godless. Job's hope is not perishing, or he is not lacking in hope because he is not rooted in God, or he is because he has forgotten God. In fact, he is still aware of God. He still knows who God is, but it is simply because this is happening to Job for no reason. There is no traditional religious explanation for what is happening to Job here. And this might frustrate a lot of us. This might get under our skin, that there isn't an answer that can be put together as to why Job is facing what he is facing because of a religious or a traditional perspective on things, or tradition or wisdom based in tradition and religion. There isn't a simple answer, and the answer is not found in Bildad's tradition and religion. The next thing that I just want to highlight for us in the last sections of this passage in Job 8 is this, verse 20. Surely God does not reject one who is blameless, or strengthen the hands of evildoers. So this comes brings everything into focus, that there is an immediate contradiction of what Bildad is saying here. We know Job is blameless, and so we don't just know this as the reader, but we are told this by God, that Job is blameless. And so for Bildad to be saying this, he is saying surely God does not reject one who is blameless. He is saying surely if Job is truly blameless, then God wouldn't reject him. And this contradicts what we know to be true. Job is not being rejected by God, and Job is blameless, and so there is a misunderstanding of who God is. That God is this isn't what's happening to Job isn't an indication of God's rejection on Job, and nor is it an indication of Job being sinful, but it is simply God acting in his infinite wisdom. To do something like this can only equate to God's wisdom and how he runs the universe. Verse 21, he says this. He says, he will yet fill your mouth with laughter and your lips with shouts of joy. And we need to just pause there. Bildad is making a very, very strong statement here. He is saying that God will prosper Job again. He's saying God will fill your mouth with laughter. God will fill your lips with shouts of joy. And we hear Eliphaz's voice saying the prosperity, and Zophar will come later with a similar kind of chiming in with a similar kind of idea that God will prosper, God will restore, God will do this. And the challenge is, how can you speak with such certainty about what God will do? For it is God that determines what he will do, not man that determines what God will do. So that is dangerous territory that we start entering into, is if we start stating or proclaiming with absolute certainty what God will do. Because who are we to know how God's wisdom works? Who are we to say with absolute certainty how God will function, how God will act, how God will do what he does? And we need to be careful if we find ourselves in this category of where Job is going, that we can think that we can say with absolute certainty anything that God will do. Then, verse 22, he concludes, Bildad says this, your enemies will be clothed in shame, and the tents of the wicked will be no more. And so essentially he gets to the end of this, and it adds to this image of restoration that Job will encounter, that even Job's enemies around him will be put to shame, that they will be ridiculed, that they will have nothing. And in one sense, roles will reverse. If Job is able to once again be rooted in God. So the problem with Job, and according to Bildad, is that he has lost the grounding of where he's putting his trust. He needs to turn to God and be rooted in God once more. But we know this is not true because Job is rooted in God. He is trusting in God. But life and its circumstances are incredibly difficult for Job. So what do we make of this for ourselves today as we kind of wrap up just briefly what Bildad has said? The first thing that I think we need to highlight is we need to really consider that, yes, what Bildad may be saying here may resonate with us to a level, to some degree, that some of what he is saying is true. We need to be careful that we think that we think and hold too strongly to our traditions and beliefs. That what we have been taught by our parents or by books or whatever, that those things are set in stone against who God is. So I'm not saying that those things are wrong. I'm not saying that they are not applicable. But what I am saying is that when it comes to weighing them up against God, we need to be willing to shift our traditions, to shift our religious perspectives, to shift our theological awareness of who God is, to shift how we perceive things when it comes in line with God, or when it comes into the sphere of actually being challenged by who God is. So in Bildad's case here, we see him coming with his tradition, his religion, his understanding of what has been said before, and he desperately wants to apply those things to Job. But the reality is that it doesn't always work that way. It's not that straightforward. It's not that simple. It doesn't always unfold that way. And as we're going to work through Job, we're going to see how that opens up and pans out all the more, that God's wisdom is all about something that exceeds our understanding, exceeds who we are, exceeds what we think we know. And it will challenge us. It will challenge our very traditions, our very religious understandings. And that in light of Job's circumstance, he is rooted in God, and yet we might find ourselves in those circumstances too, where we are trusting in God and believing in him, and really trying our best to serve him, but life is still going to be complicated. And what do we do then? Does our world fall apart because life is difficult and we are experiencing suffering and hardship? If our life begins to fall apart, then perhaps our roots are in the wrong place and they aren't in God. But the reality is that even when your roots are in God, when you're established, when you're set in him, life could still present you with hardships. But we take comfort that we are rooted in him, despite what is happening around us. So look around you now, during this time, with the coronavirus spreading. You may desperately be seeking God, but what is happening around you is still happening. It doesn't change the circumstance, but it changes our perspective of the circumstance. It changes where we put our trust, because we recognize that our traditions and our religions and how we do things in the way we've grown accustomed to doing things may shake and change because of how God intends to shake and change things. So this is what Job is going to do, and his friends are going to help us to actually shake us as well. That as we look at things like, in one sense, how Bildad has presented this section of tradition and justice, that God shakes it up. And he says, don't think that you can speak simply out of your tradition and beliefs and what you think you know, because God can in an instant act in a completely unexpected way, and we need to be aware of that, otherwise we may lose out on what God is doing. So I hope that gets you thinking. I hope it challenges you. I hope it really actually draws your attention more and more to also what God has done for us through Jesus Christ, that through that we see all the more how God has done something beyond the tradition and the expectation that we could ever have. And even for those during the time of Christ struggled when they were considering their religion versus what Christ was coming to offer. He came to shake the system, and he truly did that through his death and resurrection. And so hopefully that gets us to really contemplate and consider it more. I'm not going to go much more into that right now, but as we go, you're going to see how that picture of Christ and how God's plan and His wisdom unfolds in Christ is fleshed out all the more through the book of Job. And I hope it really does encourage you, challenges you, and stirs you up a little bit from, maybe it stirs you from that slumber that you're in, or maybe it stirs you from the traditional way of thinking or the religious side of your faith. May your thinking be shaken and stirred, and may it come under God's wisdom rather than your own. So yeah, I pray that this will encourage you and challenge you and grow you, and that you continue to take this journey with us as we go through the book of Job. And I'll see you all next week. Cheers. Bye.